The late afternoon heat pressed down on the small American city as Ethan wiped the grease from his hands and leaned against the metal frame of the garage door. The auto shop sat on the edge of an industrial block, where trucks passed without ever really seeing the faded sign above his door. Inside, the smell of oil, rubber, and old coffee filled the cramped space. Ethan liked it that way. Predictable, simple and quiet enough for him to hear his own thoughts. He lived in a rented studio above the shop, took care of his aging mother across town, and rarely stayed out after dark. People said there were lines in this city that one should never cross. Ethan's entire life had been built on staying far from those lines. As the sun started to sink, the rumble of a heavy engine caught his attention. A black SUV, the kind that did not belong in this part of town, rolled slowly down the street and then coughed, jerked, and stalled right in front of his shop. For a brief moment, there was only silence. Then the rear door opened and a tall man in a dark suit stepped out, scanning the street with cold, sharp eyes. Behind him, another man did the same. Their posture, the way they watched everything, and the tension in their faces told Ethan exactly what kind of people they were, even if he did not know their names. These were men who usually stayed on the other side of those invisible lines. The front passenger door opened, and an elegant woman stepped out, her movements controlled and graceful. Her black hair fell over a fitted coat, and her expression was distant, as if she was used to carrying invisible weight. When she turned back to the SUV and bent slightly, Ethan saw the small figure inside. A girl, maybe 9 or 10, sat in a wheelchair adapted to the car. Her legs were thin, the muscles tense and stiff, and her arms hugged the armrests with the habitual caution of someone who had learned that movement could hurt. The girl's eyes, however, were intense and curious, scanning the garage with a mixture of fear and interest. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. One of the men barked a short order to open the hood, his tone demanding rather than requesting help. Ethan hesitated only a second. He knew better than to pretend he had not seen. He walked out, wiping his hands on a rag. The suited man glanced at him, measuring him. The woman watched too, with a quiet expectation that people would obey. Only the girl seemed to be looking at Ethan as a person, instead of a tool. He forced a polite nod and asked what happened to the SUV. The man gave a brief answer, impatient, and Ethan leaned under the hood, listening to the weak click when the engine tried to start. As he worked, he noticed small details: the adaptive pedals inside, the rails for the wheelchair, the heavy custom ramp system. The installation was expensive but rough, made for speed and appearance rather than for comfort. Screws were not fully tightened, edges were harsh, and some adjustments were off by just enough to make every transfer from chair to seat a battle. Ethan glanced at the girl again, imagining her daily struggle. The woman followed his look and immediately closed her expression, as if protecting her daughter from strangers' pity. Ethan said nothing, focusing on the mechanical problem, a damaged fuel pump, probably neglected for too long. He could fix it, but not in a few minutes. He explained that they would have to leave the SUV for a while, maybe a couple of hours if he pushed himself. The man in the suit looked annoyed, but the woman's gaze changed. She stepped slightly closer, asking in a controlled voice if the area was safe, if there was a place to wait nearby. Ethan almost laughed at the question. No one from their world ever came here voluntarily. Still, he pointed to the small waiting corner inside the shop, a worn couch, a coffee machine, a small TV with bad reception. The man entered first, checking every angle, then allowed the woman and the girl to approach. When the girl's wheelchair rolled over the uneven sidewalk, one wheel caught in a crack and jolted her entire body. She winced, her hands tightening. Ethan's instincts reacted faster than his caution, and he stepped forward, gently lifting the front of the chair over the rough spot. Their eyes met for a second. Her expression was a mix of surprise and relief. The woman watched the interaction, her jaw tightening, as if she were not used to strangers touching anything that belonged to her family. Ethan stepped back immediately, apologizing. For a heartbeat too long, no one spoke. Then the girl whispered a shy "thank you" in English, her accent faint but present. The woman placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder and guided her inside. As Ethan returned to the engine, the street felt different. The presence of those men, the tension in their shoulders, and the expensive car half blocking the entrance all signaled that his day had shifted into something else entirely. He knew the name that people only mentioned in a low voice on this side of town. Lorenzo. The city's quiet rumor of a man who handled debts, territory, and fear. Ethan wondered if this could really be that man's family. While he changed the fuel pump, his mind went back to the girl's tightened hands, the badly installed wheelchair system, and the way pain had flickered and then disappeared behind practiced control. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt that helping someone might come with a price he was not ready to pay. Chapter 2. Lines You Don't Cross. The repair took longer than Ethan expected. The SUV's undercarriage showed signs of speed and hard braking, and there were marks of rushed modifications. Different bolts, scratched paint, torn insulation where wires had been pulled and reattached. He worked carefully, aware of the weight of eyes on his back. Through the small window into the waiting area, he could see the outline of the suited men. They did not sit. They stood near the door, checking phones, watching every sound from the street. The woman sat on the couch next to her daughter, legs crossed, back straight, a posture that said she was used to being observed, judged, and respected. During a break to clean his hands, Ethan passed by the waiting area. The girl, Sophia, had a sketchbook on her lap. Her hands moved slowly, but with determined precision, as she drew the outline of the SUV and the garage front. The lines were slightly shaky, yet full of intention. The woman, Isabella, noticed Ethan's glance and asked in a measured tone how much longer it would take. He gave an honest estimate. She nodded, and for the first time her expression softened just a little, as if she recognized the simple reality of waiting. One of the men shifted, impatient, but said nothing. Sophia's wheelchair was parked too close to a step in the floor, the small front wheels touching the edge. Ethan knelt a safe distance away and, without reaching for the chair, asked Sophia if she wanted him to adjust the brakes so the chair would not slide. Isabella's gaze sharpened, evaluating his intentions. Sophia looked between them and then nodded shyly. Ethan showed her where the brakes were slightly loose, explaining in simple terms how they could be tightened. He spoke directly to the girl, not about her, not over her. Sophia listened closely, her eyes brightening with the rare feeling of being treated like someone who could understand, not just an object to be protected. While he fastened the brake and adjusted a misaligned footrest, he noticed the scars on the metal, the worn-out rubber on the foot support, and the bruising marks on the girl's ankle where the edges rubbed against her skin. It was the kind of neglect that came not from lack of money, but from lack of attention. Whoever had installed this equipment had done enough to say it was done, without caring how it felt day after day. Ethan heard Isabella's quiet intake of breath as she saw what he saw. For a second, her polished exterior cracked, revealing guilt and frustration. She had accepted the solutions provided, trusting that money would buy the best for her daughter. Now, standing in a small, forgotten garage, she realized how many details she had missed. Ethan finished the adjustment and rolled back slightly, giving them space. Sophia tested the brakes with careful movements. The chair responded better, more stable, less likely to slide when she shifted her weight. A small smile appeared on her face, soft and genuine. Isabella watched her daughter and then turned to Ethan with a question that held more layers than the words themselves. How much did she owe him for the extra work on the wheelchair? Ethan shook his head, saying it was nothing, just a quick adjustment. The suited men exchanged a glance. In their world, nothing was nothing. Everything had a price. When the SUV was finally ready, Ethan called them over and explained what he had done, replaced the fuel pump, checked the lines, and flagged a few other issues they should look at soon. He kept his explanation professional and neutral, careful not to sound judgmental about their driving habits. Isabella listened attentively, asking precise questions. Lorenzo himself did not appear. Ethan realized the boss had probably stayed in the back seat the entire time, hidden behind tinted glass and power that did not need to be seen. When Ethan handed the keys to one of the men, the rear door opened just a crack, enough for him to catch the outline of a middle-aged man's profile, sharp and self-assured. As they prepared to leave, Isabella thanked Ethan with more warmth than before. Sophia waved a small goodbye from the adapted seat, now slightly more comfortable after Ethan's quick corrections. The SUV pulled away, taking with it the tangible pressure that had filled the street. The garage felt suddenly empty, the hum of the city returning to its usual tone. Ethan exhaled slowly. He thought that was the end of it. Just another strange day. Another client he would never see again. That night, however, when he visited his mother's modest apartment, the local news on the old television showed a brief image of Lorenzo leaving a high-end restaurant surrounded by bodyguards. The caption described him as a prominent businessman under investigation for alleged ties to organized crime. Ethan froze. He recognized the same bodyguards, the same posture, the same sharp profile barely visible in his garage earlier that day. His mother, unaware of Ethan's connection, shook her head and changed the channel, tired of bad news. Ethan said nothing, but inside he felt the ground move. He had not just helped a rich family. He had stepped, even if just for an afternoon, into the orbit of a man whose name everyone avoided. At closing time, as he turned off the lights in the garage, Ethan promised himself that this was one of those lines he would not cross again. If that SUV ever came back, he would keep things short, distant, strictly transactional. But later, lying awake in his small room above the shop, the image that stayed with him was not the boss or his men. It was Sophia's careful smile when the wheelchair brake finally held steady, and the unspoken question in Isabella's eyes. Why had no one taken that kind of care before? That question would not leave him, no matter how hard he tried. Chapter 3. A quiet offer. The week that followed seemed ordinary on the surface. Ethan worked on delivery vans, old sedans, and pickup trucks that had seen better days. Still, there was a new alertness in him. Every time he heard an engine too smooth for this neighborhood, his muscles tensed. Nothing happened for days, and he began to believe the encounter had been a one-time accident. Then, on a gray morning, as rain traced slow lines down the garage windows, the same black SUV appeared again, this time moving with clear purpose toward his shop. Two vehicles followed it, forming a short convoy that looked completely out of place on his street. Passers-by turned their heads and then quickly looked away. The SUV stopped right in front of the entrance, but this time the rear door opened first. Lorenzo stepped out, wearing a dark coat over a tailored suit, his presence heavy and controlled. He did not need to raise his voice to command attention. The way his bodyguards aligned around him was enough. Isabella stepped out after him, a softer silhouette beside his rigid frame. Sophia remained inside for a moment until one of the men activated the ramp and carefully rolled her wheelchair down. The air in the garage thickened. Ethan wiped his hands, forced himself to breathe normally, and walked toward them. He greeted them with polite distance. Lorenzo studied him with a calm that felt more dangerous than any overt threat. He complimented the previous repair in a tone that felt almost like a test, and mentioned that the car had not given them any trouble since then. Then, to Ethan's surprise, he said his daughter had talked about the mechanic who had fixed her chair without being asked. Coming from him, The phrase sounded both like a compliment and a warning. Sophia, sitting between her parents, watched Ethan with open curiosity. She held the same sketchbook on her lap, now filled with more drawings. Ethan caught a glimpse of a page showing his garage, more complete this time, with extra details. The crooked sign, the toolbox in the corner, even the old coffee machine. He felt a strange mix of pride and discomfort. Lorenzo cleared his throat and went straight to the point. With controlled words, he explained that Sophia's equipment, including her wheelchair and the car adaptation, had always been handled by specialists. But his daughter had come home complaining of pain less often since their last visit. Lorenzo then made an offer. He wanted Ethan to take a look at all of Sophia's mobility gear, the wheelchair, the ramp, and even some devices at their home. He did not specify a price. Instead, he used phrases like, "We take care of those who work with us," and "No one loses when they are close to this family." For most people in the city, such an offer would be an advance payment and a thinly veiled trap. Ethan felt the weight of the proposal press on him. Saying yes might ensure protection and money, but it would also tie him to a world he had avoided his entire life. Saying no, on the other hand, might be interpreted as disrespect. Isabella broke the tension by speaking more directly. She admitted that Sophia struggled daily with transfers, stairs, and badly positioned supports. Money had never been the problem, she said in a quiet but firm voice. The problem was that everyone around them expected her to accept what was given, because questioning meant displeasing powerful people. She looked at Ethan with a different kind of request, not a business proposal, but a mother's plea. Could he, using his eye for detail and his hands, help make her daughter's life less painful? Ethan looked at Sophia. Her eyes did not beg, but they did not hide the hope inside them either. He thought of his own mother, of nights spent adjusting an old recliner so her sore back would hurt less. He swallowed hard and answered carefully. He said he could take a look, but he wanted to stay strictly within his work as a mechanic, with clear limits. He would not be involved in any other kind of favor. Lorenzo held his gaze for a long second. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled slightly, though the expression did not fully reach his eyes. He agreed to Ethan's condition, at least in words, and signaled to one of his men to bring a second, folded wheelchair from the trunk. Inside the garage, Ethan examined the spare chair with technical focus. He saw again the same pattern: expensive parts, rushed adjustments. The center of gravity was slightly off, which made the chair harder to maneuver. The brakes were not symmetrical. The armrest height forced Sophia to continuously tense her shoulders. As he pointed out each issue, Isabella listened, as if hearing a diagnosis she had long suspected, but no one had explained. Lorenzo remained standing near the doorway, watching both his wife and the mechanic, trying to understand the bond slowly forming between them. Ethan agreed to keep the spare chair for a few days, promising to adjust it and make some modifications, using materials from his shop. He explained that he was not a medical professional, only a mechanic with good hands. Isabella responded that sometimes people with good hands did more than those with credentials and no heart. The comment made one of the bodyguards shift uncomfortably, but Lorenzo stayed silent. Before leaving, Isabella did something unexpected. She placed a business card on Ethan's workbench, with only a phone number and a first name. She said that if he ever needed help, any kind of help, he should call. When the convoy left, the silence that followed felt heavier than before. Ethan looked at the folded wheelchair, at the neat business card, and at his oil-stained hands. He realized that, despite all his internal promises, he had crossed one of those lines. He was not just repairing a car for a dangerous man. He was about to enter that man's home, even if only through the devices that moved his daughter. And yet, beneath the fear, there was also a quiet certainty. He knew that if he turned his back on Sophia now, If he refused to help when he could clearly make a difference, he would not be able to respect the man he saw in the mirror every morning. Chapter 4. Building the Miracle. The following nights became a secret project. After closing the shop and visiting his mother, Ethan returned to the garage and locked the doors. He placed the spare wheelchair at the center of the space and began to dismantle it piece by piece, laying out the parts on clean cloths. The structure was solid but rigid, designed more for durability than comfort. He thought of Sophia's thin shoulders, the way she gripped the armrests, and the small bruises on her ankles. Every detail of her posture and expression guided his decisions. Ethan did not have access to advanced medical equipment or specialized labs, but he had something else: experience with suspensions, shock absorbers, and weight distribution. He adapted small springs, silicone pads, and adjustable joints he had salvaged from other jobs. He created a softer, more flexible support under the seat to absorb part of the impact every time the chair hit an uneven surface. He reshaped the footrest angle so her feet would rest without constant muscle tension. For the armrests, he added thin layers of a firm but gentle material, wrapped carefully in a neutral, discreet cover. His goal was not to make the chair look different, but to make it feel different. While he worked, he faced another problem that had always bothered him since he first saw the SUV: the way Sophia had to be transferred from chair to car seat. The process was slow, awkward, and humiliating for her, even with help. Remembering the rails he had observed, he started sketching on pieces of cardboard. He imagined a sliding base that could lock safely, allowing the seat to move toward the door, closer to the wheelchair, reducing the distance and rotation required. It was not a new invention in the world, but no one had installed it properly in that vehicle. With scrap metal, careful measurements, and sleepless focus, he began to build his own version, simple, strong, and precise. Days turned into a sequence of ordinary repairs during business hours and silent experiments at night. Several times, Ethan stopped and asked himself if he was going too far. The more he improved the chair and the car adaptation, the more connected he felt to Sophia's life. This connection, in turn, brought him closer to a man like Lorenzo, someone he would never choose to serve. But then, he would remember the way Isabella's voice trembled when she admitted her daughter's daily pain, the way Sophia's fingers tightened on the sketchbook whenever the car hit a bump, and he would return to his work with renewed determination. When he finally tested the modified wheelchair on the cracked pavement outside the garage, the difference was clear. The small impacts were softer, the vibrations less aggressive. The chair responded better to direction changes, allowing smoother turns with less effort. He imagined Sophia rolling through the hallways of a large house, through uneven sidewalks, through ramps that had never been designed with real bodies in mind. It was not perfection, but it was progress. He wiped sweat from his forehead and allowed himself a rare moment of quiet satisfaction. The day came when he had to make the call. Using the number on Isabella's card, Ethan dialed from the small phone in his office. A calm, professional voice answered, asking who it was. When he said his name, there was a brief silence, and then Isabella's voice came through, warmer and more direct. He told her the chair was ready, and that he had also made some suggestions for the car's interior. She listened carefully, and then said they would come that same afternoon. Her tone carried both urgency and trust, like someone who had been waiting for this moment. When the convoy arrived again, Ethan felt less startled but no less cautious. This time Sophia seemed more animated. Her hair was tied back, and there was a light in her eyes that had not been there before. The bodyguards did their habitual security dance, checking doors and corners, but the focus of the day was clearly on the folded wheelchair waiting near the workbench. Ethan explained step by step what he had changed. He did not use complex words. He spoke in practical terms, emphasizing comfort, stability, and efficiency. Sophia transferred into the modified chair with assistance, but the movement was smoother, with fewer pauses and adjustments. As she rolled forward, testing the wheels, her face lit up with genuine surprise. The small bumps of the garage floor no longer forced her shoulders into a defensive hunch. Her hands moved with more confidence. Isabella covered her mouth with one hand, eyes glistening. Lorenzo watched in silence, arms crossed, jaw tight. This was not a luxury purchase or a status symbol. It was something that quietly challenged the way he had measured value until now. Ethan then showed them the sliding seat base he had built for the SUV. He demonstrated how the seat could move outward once unlocked, reducing the gap between car and chair. There were multiple safety locks, clear markers, and a mechanism that required deliberate motion rather than brute force. It was simple enough for trained helpers to operate, but solid enough to earn Lorenzo's cautious approval. They tried the system with Sophia, step by step, with Ethan guiding but never rushing them. For the first time, a transfer that usually demanded grit and suppressed pain seemed almost fluid. When Sophia successfully completed the movement and settled back into the modified chair, she looked at her parents with wide eyes. Then she looked back at Ethan, struggling to put into words what she felt. She did not speak loudly, but every person in that garage could see the change in her posture. The way she breathed more freely, as if a weight had shifted from her body to the metal around her. In that moment, the word miracle passed through Isabella's mind, not as something magical, but as the result of rare, honest care in a life filled with fear and convenience.